Friday, the final day of the week. These are the voyages of the program Unsportsmanlike Conduct. Its ongoing mission to explore strange new movies, to seek out new bits and new edifications, to boldly go where no radio program has gone before. Well, Kent's Movie Club. It's El Kent's Movie Club. El Kent's Movie Club. It's El Kent's Movie Club.
He joins us every Friday for the Movie Club. His name is Kent Wagamon, and he writes for the Lincoln Journal-Star. Hello, Kent.
Hello, gentlemen.
How are you on this Friday?
I'm doing very well. I had a little credit card fraud issue over the week.
Oh,
I got
no.
cards today, so.
Oh,
congrats on the new cards.
Everything okay, Ken? Is your credit destroyed or is things fine?
They did not touch it. They did not get any money out of me or anything. It was a
that's good
data breach thing, but it got solved, and I was very happy when I came home and my new cards were in the mail.
Understandably so. Wow. All right. Well, that's brutal. Well, hopefully, Kent, that's the worst thing that happened to you this week, and not having to watch the documentary that Jack Mitchell chose for the Movie Club today. Now, apparently, there was a misunderstanding, because Jack, what was the one that you wanted to do?
We all agreed to do. I don't know what changed, but we all agreed on the air to do the Woodstock 99 documentary.
I don't remember agreeing to that.
I had in passing mentioned this one because I had watched it, but I didn't think any people would want to do it. But I did want to do a music related one because Kent, I like to hear Kent's takes on those, and that's what I watch a lot of. So, I enjoyed this, but I'm afraid everybody else hated it. So now I'm a little concerned.
Kent, would you have been happier if we did the Woodstock 99 doc?
Let me put it this way. This isn't a bad film.
Right.
No, it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
I just can't stand that music. Right?
See,
my issue has nothing to do with the movie. It's like that stuff was popular like when I was in late high school, college age.
Mm-hmm.
That was the crap that we punk rockers just had no use for whatsoever. And that continues to this day.
Before we dive into the movie, Jack, you're the guest. You picked you picked the movie. Why don't you tell us about Music Box Yacht Rock, a documentary? And by the way, there were 2 colons in there. Music Box : Yacht Rock : a documentary.
Yeah. So this was on Max, and Kent maybe can help me a little bit. Isn't this are the Bill Simmons people behind this one?
Yes,
I'm trying to remember.
Simmons was I think he's the executive producer, but it's his production company, whatever it is that did it.
Now the long story, and by the way, Kent, I was the same way as you growing up with this music. I hated it. And for some reason, in the last 5-7 years, I got an appreciation of it. Now, the term yacht rock was actually coined by a YouTube web series, and this is talked about in the documentary, but 20 years ago. It is an old school, like early YouTube web series, which, by the way, I also recommend watching very much. You'll like that. The guys who did that then basically, like 15 years later, started a podcast where they would go through and identify whether songs are yacht rock or not based on how they defined it. Now, the mainstream definition of it is very different than the way that they define it. They talked about that a little bit during this. And, because people think like Jimmy Buffett. Jimmy Buffett's not yacht rock at all. Like that is not any song about water. No, it's not even about any of that. It's about specificity with the session players. It's about the era that it came out. It's about the complexity of the music. It's about how much jazz influence there is, those sorts of things. And so it kind of gave a little more definition and depth to the concept, and hopefully sort of took away a lot of the associations that are with it that are technically wrong. So
yeah, and Kent, before you go, I as someone who had heard a lot of these songs, I did not realize that the term yacht rock did not come along until the 2000s. So like the question that I was wondering as I started, and I'm realizing that it's like, all right, so what did they call that back then? And they mentioned it a couple of times, like pop music, right? Like one of the artists late in the movie was like, I was making pop music. I wasn't making yacht rock. I was making pop music. So I found that very interesting as someone who did not know the history of this genre at all.
I think a lot of times they call it, quote, soft rock.
Which doesn't really go together, right? It's like, what did you say earlier, Nick? A hard and floppy?
Yeah, it's a hard
floppy disc. Yeah, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense either.
It was soft rock. And as these kind of documentaries go, I thought it did a pretty good job of telling that story, right? I mean, because this stuff really only lasted as a very popular sort of style for what, maybe mid 70s to like 82
when MTV came around.
Yeah.
Well, MTV, and yeah, now it sort of had an enduring life on VH1, but it wasn't like the popularity that it was at the peak, which would have probably been 77, 78, 79 in there. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think that's interesting that they brought out was the connection that sort of all roads lead through Steely Dan, right? Which, okay, I'll give them that. Speaking of a band that I hated in the 70s, 80s, that was one. But it was the one perfect thing in the documentary is the phone call with
so funny.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking about the rule, like the legality of that. They obviously were calling in a state where it's okay. What is that? I'm trying to remember the
one party.
Yeah, because I was like, that is fascinating that they included that at the very
This
end.
is with Donald Fagen, by the way, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Donald Fagen. And in Nebraska, you can record anything without telling the person.
Without permission.
Without permission. It's a one party, and you're recording it, so everything's fine. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm sure they did that, but that's A, his personality, and B, hilarious, right? I thought.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, too, Kent, the quote and I wrote this down. I think it was early in the movie. I think she was from the New Yorker, this rock critic, and she says that Steely Dan was for dorks and weirdos. And I thought that was a hilarious line.
Amanda Petruchich, I think is how you say her name. She's a real good critic. She's really interesting to read. She's good, but I'm not necessarily don't buy her thesis that because those yacht rock people were doing something differently and bringing in the jazz and whatever, it comes full circle with punk rock. No. Okay, just no.
Kent has a lot of takes about yacht rock and punk rock.
Yeah, I wouldn't have ever put them together either, but it was I'm curious, like Nick, what did you sort of think of this whole thing? Was it entertaining? Was it interesting? How much did you even know about the genre coming into it?
Oh, so I love yacht rock.
Yeah.
When I was on 101.9 The Keg on holidays,
that's right. You guys
weekends,
did that.
You would do the yacht rock weekend. I was Captain Nick, taking you through the musical waves of yacht rock.
Look at you.
But I knew the genre, but I didn't know the origins. I had no idea it started with these guys on the internet right before I started watching or paying attention to the internet. I didn't realize that Steely Dan was the genesis for all of this because, like they kind of said, it wasn't yacht rock was just a bunch of dudes who worked with Steely Dan and then they branched out to work with other bands, and it just kind of happened. It was really fascinating. And it made me have a deeper appreciation for yacht rock and Like Christopher Cross, I didn't know a whole lot about Christopher Cross at all.
That dude seemed awkward.
He did seem awkward.
Yeah.
He seemed,
You ever interview him, Ken?
Yeah, and he's a really good guy.
yeah, he seems like a really good
He
guy.
seems like a normal person
he's
who
just
got really famous.
Really
Yeah.
normal.
Yeah.
You in Austin, you'll see him out walking around. You know, he's just a regular guy, and he's a good guy. And he knows that he hit that jackpot like nobody ever has, and then this extreme backlash then followed, and so he had a 2-year career at the top, and that was
Wow.
it. But what they say he sold like 15-20 million records. Well, that's enough. He's fine.
Yeah, he and Billie Eilish are the only ones to win. What was it, 5 Grammys in one night?
To win all four of the big awards. Record of the Year, which is the one that goes to the performer, Song of the Year goes to the songwriters, Album of the Year, and Best New Artist. They were the only one to ever do that. Yeah.
What I learned the most, what blew my mind the most about this, I didn't realize how into the scene Kenny Loggins was. I didn't realize how big of an impact he had made, because I only knew him as the 80s music guy. For the longest time, I thought all he really did was just a bunch of music for movies in the 80s, and that's just what he was. That was his whole bit. I didn't realize he was a literal pioneer and a trailblazer for this would-be genre of music. It was really cool to learn that. It was really cool to hear these songs and the stories and the artist, like Toto talking about him. It's like, yeah, we heard Africa, and like, why? Or was it Rosanna or Africa that the guy was like, we heard that playing on the radio, and we're like, why that one? That's such a weird pick out of all the songs.
I think it was Africa that it was, because they threw that on. They said, I didn't know that they recorded it at the end of that. They had what he said, we had a few hours left, so we recorded it, threw it on the record, and it became their only number one hit.
I love that song. What a great song.
It's a great song. I also
the lyrics are so weird.
I thought it was funny that they're like, yeah, and it weirdly people attached themselves to it a few years ago for some reason because of the internet, and that's exactly what happened. You know, It just turned into this big cultural thing for about a year and a half, to the point where Weezer did a whole cover album based
I remember
off of
that. Yeah.
I liked it a lot. I liked this documentary.
Yeah. Jack, let me ask you this. I don't know how many of the other ones you've watched, but like, how many of the Woodstock or the Music Box documentaries did you watch? Because it definitely has me wanting to watch some of the other ones, just because I thought the production values of this were awesome.
Oh, 100%.
I don't know. I'm not sure if I've watched any or not. I've watched a ton of documentaries, so I don't quite know what's incled in that, or if it's all, if they're all on Max. I haven't.
You did watch Woodstock though, right? You did watch that.
Was that
one?
the same one, Woodstock '99, or the original?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I watched Woodstock '99. Yeah, yeah, it was great. Though I mean, I think these documentaries are great. Like we can have two discussions, as Ken pointed out. We can talk about the merits of the music, and we can discuss that. But the documentary, I mean, I love even for genres or bands or whatever I don't like. I just love that genre of music documentary for some reason. Ken, I'm sure you do too.
Yeah, and there are actually a lot of good ones out there right now, and there are like, I haven't seen this one yet, but there are things that they're starting to pick some of these things up that kind of have slid through the cracks a little bit. And there's a documentary that I think just came to Prime, but you have to pay for it, on the Sonics, who you guys may have never heard of, but they were a Seattle band in the early 60s. And,
wow.
And they were like this real great sort of punk rock almost band before there was such a name. And they had a few hits and then disappeared. And then, I would guess 10 years ago, maybe closer to that, they turned up at South by Southwest. And they put out a couple great records since then. And they by chance were staying in the same hotel I was. So I had breakfast with the Sonics one day.
What?
That's awesome.
Of course.
And a friend of mine is his name's Evan and his name just went bang. Anyway, Evan plays. He had a band called the Boss Martians, and he's from Seattle. And they needed a guitar player because the old guys are they're got to be close to 80 now, right? So Evan now plays with the Sonics when they play live, and they're one of my faves. And I haven't watched this yet, but you're starting to see those kind of documentaries. There's some really good music documentaries, and this morning and some like. This isn't a straight music documentary about a, genre or artist or whatever, but I just heard an interview this morning on a podcast that was archived. There's a great documentary called Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President. And it's got Dylan and the Allman Brothers and all these people that became friends of Carter, who he liked, and those are great films that you're not going to see, that you're starting to see more of now, I guess.
Ken, you're like the Forrest Gump of pop culture, I swear.
Ken, as a journalist, like, what do you look for in a good documentary? Because I know that there's been a lot of discourse about them in general lately. Like the one that comes to the forefront of my mind for the last couple of years is the one that was on Robert Kraft and how it was his production company, and it would whitewash the Patriots' history, and it seemingly threw Bill Belichick under the bus. I don't know any of the background of this documentary and like liberties it did or didn't take, or the POV that the director did or didn't have. But I'm curious how you kind of wade into those waters, knowing that like documentaries will always have a point of view. It's just trying to figure out if the point of view is the director or if it's the people that it's about trying to get their voice heard through the director.
Yeah, documentaries are not journalism, straight up, journalism. They're documentaries. They come with a point of view, but that point of view might just be, let's try to tell as accurate a story as we can of this, but it also might have a point to make, an axe to grind, whatever. And that scale shifts. I think the more political a documentary becomes, the more the point of view becomes important, right? When you go see a Michael Moore documentary, for example,
sure,
point of view is going to come from, right? Doesn't make so. Then you have and a judgment thing also goes in, and you can't help it, as to whether that point of view agrees with yours, right?
100%.
Documentary that comes from a completely different point of view that you have on an issue or something, then you're likely to say that's not a very good documentary, when in fact it probably is pretty effective because it made you mad enough to say it's not a good documentary.
So a connection that I had made last night when I was watching this movie, and let me know if I'm just totally off base here. They were talking about how Yacht Rock had found popularity in all those in the black communities just because of the R&B connection and how all of those sounded. But then I realized, and I don't remember the name of the artist or the band, but that band that was sampling, was it Michael McDonald?
It's like the very end.
At the end,
yeah.
Cool.
Yes, and then you could tell, at least to me, that sounded like the origins of the West Coast sound, to kind of tie it back to when we reviewed Straight Outta Compton. So really, Yacht Rock had a giant cultural impact, and we didn't necessarily, I don't think it was realized at the time, unless it was.
I think there's 2 points. It had an impact, but the quote Yacht Rock, nobody,
Right.
That was not a real thing, and it does
Right.
not rock, by the way.
Feel the groove, Kent. Feel the groove.
It's smooth. It's smooth. Yes.
It's not rock. And but yes,
not.
they had, and what you're talking about is Warren G with the West Coast, but it was also, they had De La Soul from the New York, what did they call that? It was, I think it was called Underground or something, but it was they were great. De La Soul
I love De La Soul.
For sure. Yeah.
and Tribe Called Quest and that bunch. They were great. Jack will find this amusing. They played a show on whatever, I think it's a ramen noodle place now on 14th and O.
Yeah.
They played in the basement of that place.
Late 80s.
De La Soul did?
Yeah.
What's that?
De La Soul did?
Yeah, De La Soul and Tribe Called Quest and
That's incredible.
Diggable Planets, maybe.
Oh my gosh. That's
so
an
cool.
unbelievable lineup, by the way.
They played in the basement of a whatever the restaurant was in downtown Lincoln.
Yeah, I introduced my son to De La Soul the other day, and he's like, oh, my buddy and I are listening to De La Soul all the time now. I felt very excited. I'm into the era where I introduce rap to my son, which is kind of fun. The one thing, guys, and Nick, I thought that same thing too about just to that point, man. Do you guys know how much like Steely Dan is sampled in hip hop too? I mean, you've got Black Cow in a million songs, right? You've got Kid Charlemagne in songs. You've got a ton of that all over a lot of those hip hop songs because they were listening to all those records at that time.
Yeah, but specifically hip hop songs of the 80s to the early 90s.
100%.
Because then the "You Got to Pay for This" case came through.
Yep.
And all of those samples came to a screeching halt.
For sure. I think the angle of the documentary, I know a lot of people reacted, well, I hate this music. This documentary sucks. It doesn't matter. The interesting angle about this documentary is coming back to these artists all these years later.
Yes.
And tell them they have been put in a genre and see how they react to that. And the thought
That's like the end. Those last few minutes were pretty interesting as they kind of talk about that.
They all reacted differently. Some embraced the heck out of it. Some challenged
you and hangs up.
It makes me happy. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, some of them hated it, and like that's the really interesting thing is to see, hey, you've got a revival kind of, but you've also been defined. So you've got some prominence out of this for the stuff you did, but you also may not like the box that you've been put into, and then have them react, because I've wondered that for a lot of these guys all the time. So I thought that part of it was really interesting.
It makes me really happy to know that Michael McDonald is just super cool with it, because he is, in my head, Mr. Yacht Rock, even if it wasn't Yacht Rock. Like, he's on everything. And the fact is like, oh yeah, this is awesome.
You'd be cool with it too. It's made Michael McDonald a very rich man.
Do people really not like What a Fool Believes when they hear, or Peg? Like, those are like objectively great songs, are they not?
That's a good song.
Kent?
That's not soft rock. I mean, by the way, yacht rock is not like bread, and it's not America. Like, that's AM Gold. That's soft rock. That's easy listening. Like, and I think a lot of people think of it, but man, I don't know that stuff. It's complex. It's good. A lot of the Steely, and I like Steely Dan too, though. So that probably plays into that.
I also
thought.
like Steely Dan.
I'll give you What a Fool Believes. Steely Dan stuff, it just does not.
Peg?
It doesn't connect.
You don't like Peg? Wow.
You don't like the complexity of the production, Kent?
Correct.
Damn. I love complex music.
I will supply you with a quote from, you all know who Brian Eno is?
Yes.
You know about the Eno documentary, correct?
Yes.
I watched 4 different versions of it last weekend. It streamed for 24 hours and they played it 6 times. And I watched 4 of them because it's
look like this is the one that's like the documentary changes, like depending on. Okay, yeah. I heard about this. Yeah. And
so at one point I've got to find the quote because it's fantastically great. Eno is blathering on and on about some of the techniques he used in and he has this omnichord thing. Y'all know what that is. And he was like, yeah, I've used it and blah blah blah. And then he says, you can make disgusting jazzy music with it that I wouldn't wish on anyone. Thank you.
Sad.
As someone who came to this not really thinking I'd enjoy it, I would recommend it. I thought it was fun. At the very least, it's fun history.
It is.
And learning how a genre of music can be defined by people on the internet, I also think is just a weird
years after the fact.
a weird
That's
cultural
the
phenomenon.
weird part is years after the fact.
Decades.
Quote, genres aren't artists don't go in saying, I'm going to be this.
Right.
Yeah.
So that comes in from the outside, right? But it come in from the outside, what, 30 years after it was popular, or 20 years?
Because of a bunch of comedians who are like,
messing around on the internet in
Yacht
early YouTube.
And now they're all mad because everybody does not stick by their definition to it. And they're trying to get, and they're JD Riznar's on there, and Hollywood Steve Huey's on it, and they're being interviewed about it. And they're saying, look, everybody is defining this incorrectly now. It's not Jimmy Buffett. It's not America. It's not bread. It's not any of those things. It's not only Michael McDonald and Kenny Loggins and Steely Dan, but it's Al Jarreau, right? And it's James Ingram, and it's the Pointer Sisters, and it's Michael Jackson in his early days even as well. And like I think that was one of the other things about it, that they've like, if you listen to Sirius XM Yacht Rock station, it is not even, they play like Carole King on it. I'm so confused. That there is a false definition of the genre out there, and I don't know why I get so passionate about it, but I do.
And Carole King would, I'm sure, run fleeing if she was told that she was yacht rock.
Yes, yeah, I'm sure. A bunch of them might that's on that, but it's not just soft rock. It like, I think they said this in the documentary. Yacht rock is soft rock, but soft rock isn't yacht rock.
Interesting.
Another favorite story of mine from that documentary, they were talking about Thriller for Michael Jackson and how they were collecting Totos. I didn't realize how much of Toto was just on that album. That album is basically just Toto with Michael Jackson. Yep, it's incredible.
Well, because Toto were the studio guys, right?
Just a session player. Yeah.
Session players.
Session players that made a band.
Okay, great music documentary, The Wrecking Crew.
I've seen that.
That doc looks at the studio players of the 60s who played on the Beach Boys and the Phil Spector albums and pretty much every pop hit that came out of Los Angeles for 10 years, something like in that range, maybe a little more than that. And, you know, like maybe one of the 3 or 4 greatest bass players ever is Carol Kay. And she was in that. Glenn Campbell was one of the, on the quote Wrecking Crew. Another thing that they were never the Wrecking Crew until later, right? They were just the top session guys or women. And Leon Russell was part of that. I mean, I can go through this, and it's another really great music documentary that was done at exactly the right time, because a lot of these guys from that era are fading away, shall we say.